Alright. It's the end of the year, so I thought I'd do a little reflecting. When I was growing up in the church, I thought we were working from truth. I thought we had facts written in a holy book made by the one true God with verbal and plenary inspiration. Yes, I knew we walked by faith, not by sight, and that belief was a big deal to the main gods of the Bible. But I thought that was referring to our daily lives. I thought it meant we should pray and wait for answers and try to follow what we thought we received from Yahweh. The contradictions in the Bible didn't mean anything. They couldn't. We could say no one had ever seen Yahweh and also say people had seen him. We could say nobody heard a voice when Saul of Tarsus had his epileptic seizure or whatever it was, and also say others did hear a voice. We could say Yahweh was good and loving, and yet he drowned babies. We could also say a man was 22 when he became king, and then turn around and say he was 42 when he became king, and still say that Yahweh inspired every single word in his book and watched over it through the years so that it wouldn't be corrupted, even though we knew we knew words and sentences had been added. I could go on with this, as you know, but my point is that despite all of this, I thought we knew. Here are a few things I thought we knew. Number one, I thought we knew that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. That's what everybody said, and I didn't think preachers and scholars would lie to me, especially since they were all Christians, at least, the ones I read from. Why would people who were trying to follow a God they trusted in tell lies about that God? It made no sense, so I believed them. I found out, of course, that this is simply conjecture. We have many reasons, in fact, to believe Moses did not write the first 5 books of the Bible. For one, Deuteronomy 34:6 states that no man knoweth of his, Moses, sepulchre unto this day. From which we can surmise both that Moses didn't write this about himself and that many, many days, months, and years have passed since Moses' death when Deuteronomy was written. We don't say to this day unless a lot of time has passed. Moses was supposed to be the meekest man on the earth, but a meek man wouldn't say that he himself was the meekest of all. Moses also took credit for what his father-in-law did regarding judging the people, so he wasn't meek. Genesis speaks of kings in Israel before any kings reigned, so the book was obviously written at some point after kings began to reign in Israel. According to Porphyry, a Greco-Phoenician philosopher, 234 circa 305 CE, the writings that supposedly belonged to Moses were burnt when the temple was destroyed, and afterwards were composed inaccurately 1,180 years after Moses' death by Ezra and his followers. This would have been somewhere in the vicinity of 480 to 440 BCE. According to D.M. Murdoch, the language used in the Tanakh flourished mainly during the 6th century BCE. This was about the time of the exile of the Jews in Babylon, when Ezra worked under the authority of the kings of Persia. While we can't know the exact date of the writing of the Old Testament scriptures or who wrote them, the view of modern scholars is that the Bible is not as old as we had assumed. We really can't be sure who wrote the initial documents or when they were written. More than that, we don't even know that Moses ever really existed. Some aspects of his story were taken from the myth of the Akkadian king Sargon the Great, who reigned in Mesopotamia from 2334 to 2279 BCE. Sargon was supposedly set adrift in a basket on the Euphrates, as Moses was on the Nile, and again, as with Moses, the reason was in order to avoid infanticide. Also, historian Barbara Walker noted, the Moses tale was originally that of an Egyptian hero, Ra-Harakti, the reborn sun god of Canopus, whose life story was copied by biblical scholars. The same story was told of the sun hero fathered by Apollo on the Virgin Crusa. of Sargon, king of Akkad in 2242 BC, and of the mythological twin founders of Rome, among many other baby heroes set adrift in rush baskets. It was a common theme. Number 2, I thought we knew who wrote the Gospels and when. After all, the authors' names are supposedly written at the top of the books, and some Bibles give us the supposed date of writing. Again, why would people purporting to have truth lie about something like that? But I found out that we don't know who wrote these manuscripts, let alone when. The Catholic Church admits that the authors of the Gospels are unknown. The first few centuries of the Common Era produced tons of fables and myths, and in order to put together a somewhat coherent and consistent religious document, the various manuscripts had to be perused and a determination made as to whether they were worthy of inclusion in the Holy Book. Walter Castles wrote, "No period in the history of the world ever produced so many spurious works as the first 2 or 3 centuries of our era. The name of every apostle or Christian teacher, not excepting that of the great master himself, was freely attached to every description of religious forgery. False gospels, epistles, acts, martyrologies were unscrupulously circulated." Tony Bushby noted that the church maintains that the titles of our gospels were not intended to indicate authorship, adding that the headings were affixed to them. As Jerome Neary noted, the bottom line is we really don't know for sure who wrote the Gospels. The secret book of John, the Apocryphon of John, a dialogue between John and Jesus, was written sometime before 180 CE. We know this because Irenaeus referred to it in his Adversus Heresies. But Celsus, writing around 170 CE, never heard the books Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Since the first mention and quote by a Christian writer from either the Gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John cannot be found before 180 CE, we can only assume that they were written around or about that time. The Gospels under the names of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John seem to have magically appeared sometime near the end of the 2nd century. The Catholic Encyclopedia acknowledges that documentary sources of knowledge about Christianity's earliest development are chiefly the New Testament scriptures, the authenticity of which we must, to a great extent, take for granted. The encyclopedia even admits that the earliest of the extant manuscripts of the New Testament date back no further than the middle of the 4th century AD. It also confirms that the book of Luke could have been written until about 200 years after the time of Jesus. This is because Luke addressed Theophilus, who was Bishop of Antioch from 169 to 177 CE. The encyclopedia notes that Pope Clement I, around 97 CE, didn't quote from any of the Gospels or mention the authors. No Gospel was referred to until about 185 CE, being first mentioned by Irenaeus in his Book 2, Chapter 16. This explains why Justin Martyr, who lived around 140 CE, never quoted anything from the Gospels, apparently never hearing of them. If these books didn't appear until after all the apostles were dead, then the apostles didn't write them. The New Testament is completely anonymous. And again, the oldest complete copy of it dates to the 4th century CE. Samuel Butler noted there is a reason why there were no New Testaments until the 4th century. They were not written until then. Now, that's not to say that nothing existed. However, although much had been written, there was nothing resembling any kind of canon, and people were still writing. Piero Scaruffi wrote, in 170, Tatian admits he was working on a new gospel that would summarize all the other ones, thereby implying that Christians were still writing and rewriting gospels based on their own assumptions and preferences, not on historical facts. Also in the 2nd century, Clement of Alexandria admits that 2 versions of Mark's gospel existed but one was being suppressed because it contained two passages that should not be viewed by average Christians. Now, both passages could be interpreted as Lazarus being Jesus' lover and his resurrection as being an initiation to some kind of sexual rite, the way most pagan mysteries implied a death and a rebirth. Thus, the texts were being chosen, edited, and purged for the first 2 centuries of the Christian era. Number 3, I thought we knew what happened to all of the apostles. Their means of death was talked about in church and presented as truth. Peter was hanged upside down, for instance. But then I discovered that it was all just made up. We don't even know if these men existed. And as I said in number 2 above, we know that the stories about the martyrs of these men were simply fabricated. It's possible that everything about them was fabricated and they didn't live at all. Number 4, speaking of who existed, I for sure thought we knew Jesus was real. I mean, come on. If we couldn't even know that for sure, what were we doing worshiping some man we didn't even know ever lived, let alone claim that he was the son of a god? But no, we don't even know that. The stories of his life are just stories, and contradictory ones at that. The Jew Trypho in the 2nd century disbelieved and said to just a martyr, "But Christ, if he has come and is anywhere, is unknown. But you, having got an idle story by the end, do form yourself an imaginary Christ, and for his sake you foolishly and inconsiderately rush headlong into dangers." Later, mythicists such as French scholar Charles Francois Dupuy and Count Volney, British Robert Taylor, Godfrey Higgins, J.M. Robertson, and Gerald Massey, and German Arthur Drews spoke against a historical Jesus. By the end of the 19th century, J.P. Lundy admitted that most of the mythicist arguments were true, although he held on to Jesus as the Christ while claiming that earlier dying and rising gods were prototypes. Irishman Thomas L. Brodie, a Dominican priest, has also questioned since the 1970s whether Jesus lived. Historical researcher Michael Palkovich claims that Jesus is a mythical character. Palkovich investigated the writings of 126 authors who lived and wrote in the 1st through the 3rd centuries CE and found no verifiable mention of Jesus. Think about that. 3 centuries and nobody mentioned Jesus. Valerie Tirico presented 5 reasons why she doesn't believe Jesus lived. A, no secular evidence supports a belief in Jesus. B, the earliest New Testament authors were unclear as to the events of his life, which became more detailed in later writings. C, the stories in the New Testament make no claim of being first-hand accounts. D, the Gospels are contradictory to one another. And E, modern scholars who claim Jesus existed see him as totally different people. D.M. Murdoch wrote, "The Jesus Christ of the New Testament is a fictional compilation of characters, not a single historical individual. Compilation of multiple people is no one. When the mythological and midrashic layers are removed, there remains no historical core to the onion. The evidence reveals that the gospel story is myth historicized, not history mythologized." Number 5, I thought we knew that prophecies made in the Old Testament were fulfilled in the New Testament. I thought this because the prophecies were written, and many years later the words, or many of them at least, came true according to the New Testament. But then I realized that we don't know whether the words stating that the prophecies were fulfilled may themselves be lies. Anybody can write a sequel to a book and tie up all the loose ends. And of course, not all loose ends are even tied up in the New Testament. And yes, I knew that some of the prophecies had supposedly been fulfilled shortly after they were spoken. Of course, that wasn't even necessarily true, as the prophecies were no doubt written after the events that they supposedly fulfilled. And that leads me to my next point, number 6. I thought we knew that double fulfillment of prophecy was a real thing. No, the Bible doesn't mention anything like that. But it was taught to me as truth by those who knew that was the only way to make sense of saying Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies when they had already been fulfilled in the Old Testament. Number 7, speaking of Jesus having fulfilled the law and the prophets, I thought he did. If he didn't, then he wasn't the Messiah. So he had to have fulfilled them whether he actually did or not. The Bible says not a jot or tittle would pass from the law until the law and the prophets were fulfilled. Yet I found out that Jesus didn't fulfill them. The Old Testament talks about a resurrection, which Jesus supposedly fulfilled, even though it hasn't happened. That is according to fundamental Christians. Now, preterists believe it happened either literally or metaphorically. But listen to this, Job 19:26. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. Psalm 17:15. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Hosea 13:14. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be thy plagues. O grave, I will be thy destruction. Repentance shall be hid from mine eyes. Now, Paul did say this had happened. He said death had been abolished. But then he also said the last enemy to be abolished would be death. But if the last enemy is gone, then why is Satan still here? And if death has been abolished, why do we still die? Has this all happened, fundamental Christians? No? Then Jesus didn't fulfill the law and the prophets, did he? Yet you claim that he did. Number 8, thought we knew the Bible was true. I thought it had been proven. I mean, for crying out loud, why would people who claim moral superiority lie about whether they know the Bible to be true? But they did lie. They do lie. And they teach little children their lies, proclaiming that they're speaking truth. And no, some of them don't know, just like I didn't know. But I didn't know because I didn't search for truth. I simply accepted what I was told. And that's why Christians who don't know. Number 9, based on all the other lies that I believed, I thought we knew there was a God and that there was only one God. No, even the Bible doesn't bear this out. Yet I was taught it and believed it. However, I discovered that the Bible teaches about many gods. It's simply the story of the God of one group of people, a God who hated the other gods and fought them the way Sonic the Hedgehog fights Eggman, aka Dr. Robotnik. Number 10, I thought we knew the one true God of the Bible was good. Yes, I saw in my mind's eye all the dead babies and dead pregnant women. I saw the raped girls. I saw the enslaved people. I saw the divinely authorized mass murders and theft of property. I saw it all. But I thought we knew that we didn't know good from evil. I thought we couldn't direct our own steps. I thought Yahweh's judgments and ways were past finding out. I thought his ways and thoughts were higher than mine, so I just didn't understand. I thought any evil he did was actually good. But evil can't be good. Evil is evil. Number 11, I thought we knew that we weren't wasting our lives by hoping for a wonderful life after death. I thought this was a surety. I thought wise men had figured it all out many years ago before I came into existence. So I didn't feel the need to worry about it or seek to find out myself. Stupid, yeah, but that's what I thought. So I never involved myself in apologetics or searching for dissenting voices. I dismissed atheists and agnostics out of hand because I thought we knew. Number 12, finally, I thought we knew that the evil we ourselves do within our religious beliefs was actually good and holy and moral. I thought we had a divine right and obligation to judge the fruit of others and speak out against it if we considered it to be bad. I thought that if I didn't tell people how evil they were, their blood would be on my hands. Worst of all in my own life, I thought we knew that hitting our children or hitting other children was good. I thought it was my job to break the spirit of my children if their spirit was rebellious. I thought that foolishness was bound in their hearts and the rod of correction would drive it far from them. I thought I owed this to my children. Did it make sense to me? No, it absolutely did not. I had to go against my own thinking and my own heart. But again, my thoughts and desires didn't matter. I thought we knew. Otherwise, why were we pretending we knew? Why were we making false statements that we had truth when we simply had contradictory manuscripts about an evil God who made us evil? A God who forced us to mistreat our own children. A God who made us mistreat other adults who weren't like us in the way they lived their lives. Thought we knew. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the young atheist to whom I said, "You're going to hell in a handbasket." I'm sorry to the man I called a heathen because he said he wasn't the kind of Christian that rejected other religious beliefs. I'm sorry to the friends who were one type of Christian while I was another and I tried to convince them I was the right type. I'm sorry I judged my friends who went to the prom or drank alcohol. I'm sorry to the lesbian I hid on Facebook because I was repulsed by her words and photos. I'm sorry to the woman I accused in my mind or the women I accused in my mind because they dressed in a way I condemned. But mostly, I'm sorry that I dragged my children out 3 times a week and sometimes more to hear the lies that I had heard. And I'm sorry I followed that book in punishing them for their misdeeds rather than sitting down calmly and questioning them to see why they did what they did and helping them to work through whatever was bothering them. Thought we knew. Thought we knew. I thought we knew, but I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I can't say it enough. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought we. Thank you all. Bye.